He said he was going to work it out with you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I meet with him on Wednesdays too. I talk to her then. Yeah, that won't take a minute. So.
Yeah.
Hey, good evening.
Hey, Frank, how are you?
Good. I'm gonna be mobile for a bit. So,
All right.
hey, everyone.
Ryan. Colleen. Charlie. Hey, Don. So we are just missing John Miller and Lisa. And Mark is going to be a few minutes late, so he said to get started. So if everyone is ready, it is 6:01. We can call to order and get started. And who's going to, Chris, are you watching for public comment? Or Andrew?
Yeah, Jay, I can help you with that.
Okay. Is anyone on right now, public comment?
It's 2 attendees, no hands. Yeah. So,
Okay.
No hands raised, Jay. And I'm in the car for this one, so I'm going to ask Andy or Vivian to throw up the agenda on screen if you need that at any point.
Okay. I have it up now so I can read from it. That's fine.
Great.
So first thing was the approval of the minute meetings. We do have a quorum. Mark isn't on, but we have minute meetings for 2/7 and 2/16. So if we can get a motion to approve those two sets.
I'll make that motion.
All right, Chris, second?
Second.
Who was second?
I can be. Second.
Okay, thank you, Brian. We're just trying to be clear for Frida so that it's hard to take the notes. We'll get a roll call. Geetha?
Yeah, I had my hand up, Jay, but anyway, for the
Okay, you approve the meeting minutes?
16th, I had a question about the phase one, didn't get into the minutes, but I just wanted to say that as a comment. For the February 16th minutes,
Okay.
phase one, I did bring up whether it's the right assumption to start during the school year and whether it's a reasonable assumption with the extent of the site work, whether it's a reasonable duration, but anyway.
So did you send that to Don?
I did not, because in the past it did not work, so I thought maybe I'll say it here.
Don, how do you want to handle that? You're on mute. Still on mute. There you go. No. We can't hear you, Don. He's throwing his hands up.
Hey, Jay, I might make this suggestion. If Geetha and it broke up a little bit. If Geetha is just looking to make an amendment for the meeting minutes on the 16th, I'm happy to amend my motion so that we just approve the minutes of February 7th and we let those meeting minutes of the 16th just sit as a draft. If Geetha could kindly just email whatever edits she's proposing to Don, that would be helpful to have. And we can still submit those as draft minutes in the PSR.
Okay. Is that okay with you, Geetha?
Yes, fine, Jay. Yes, so
Okay.
What do I do?
Chris is do you
Sure.
want to restate that, Chris?
Yeah, so I retract my motion and I move to approve the minutes from February 7th as presented.
Okay. Second?
Second.
Second by Geetha. All right. Don? You can raise your hand. Okay. John? Todd?
Aye.
Colleen?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Chris? Frank?
Aye.
All right. So moved. All right. So that's 2-7 only.
Quick question, Jay, or for the group, are we at some disadvantage by having a missing set of minutes for our submission next week, later this week? Does that matter?
It's a question for
My
Charlie.
sense, Brian, would be we could say when we submit the PSR. I mean, in other words, we're going to have a PSR authorization vote tonight, and that'll show up in draft minutes. And this will probably be a replay, just like it was on the PDP, because they actually asked us to submit the approved minutes for the PDP authorization, if that makes sense. So there will have to be like a follow-up communication with the MSBA for certified minutes. So I think this would mean we'll be sending them 2 sets instead of 1, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, once that got approved with the minutes from tonight, then I'll send them to the MSBA. Thank you.
Frida, are you okay with the motions?
Yes, that's fine. So I just want to clarify, the minutes for the 16th are on hold then, right?
Yes, draft. Yes. Okay, moving into Lynch School. This is Charlie, MSBA PDP.
Okay, can I share my screen? I can, right? Yeah. Can everyone see that?
Not yet. Okay, Lisa.
No luck?
Oh.
Share. Now can you
There
see
you go.
it?
Yes.
Okay. So, good evening. We're going to quickly go through the point of this evening's meeting is largely to approve the PSR, but we were just going to quickly wrap up sort of the PDP process as we move to the end of the PSR process. We did get MSBA PDP comments back about 10 days ago. We responded to those at the end of last week. Lots of the district, Frank and his team were very, very responsive about getting us responses during the vacation week and over the weekend, which was very much appreciated. Meg was very helpful in getting us responses in terms of the Waterhead property questions. So most of the MSBA questions and requests for clarification were around either the district's kind of programs, how they teach, how they would like to teach, or they were around the wellhead property and the clarification around that. There were a series of other less significant points, but the big takeaway is they had no significant concerns about the PDP. They had no objections to what was submitted. And the really good news is they had no problems with the proposed space template. They did, of course, as they always do, they have standard language saying we don't participate in certain things. They put that in, but I think I expect that what we've submitted will satisfy them relative to their questions around the PDP. So that process now, that PDP process, as we come to the close of PSR, is now generally complete. The site survey is complete. All the existing conditions work that we've done is complete. The soils evaluation that went into the PDP came back without finding any concerns around soils. Material testing at each location was within applicable regulatory requirements. So we have good news there in terms of the soils being relatively clean, at least at the borings we took and the testing we did. So that's all very positive. So that's kind of the close of PDP as we now get to be towards the closing of the MSB, the PSR submission coming up here. PSR is going in on Thursday, the 3rd. And the PSR, this may be a little bit small for everybody to see, but let's see if I make it bigger, it'll probably blow up. Well, that helps. Can you see that? There's a table of contents for the PSR, just to give you a sense of it. And again, this is less about existing conditions analysis and more about things like systems outlines, narratives, as well as an updated educational program, which is going to reflect the work that Frank and his team did in clarifying issues for the MSBA. It will have preliminary conceptual cost model pricing. It will have an updated space summary, which is very similar to the previous space summary because the MSB didn't have any real objections to it. It will have a preliminary lead scorecard that was reviewed with the sustainability subcommittee. It's going to have conceptual plans and site plans. It will have an updated project schedule, which also is not much different than it was at the PDP. And of course, it will have the approval certification, the meeting minutes. It will have also a proposed condition traffic report. So the traffic report, it's not the full traffic report that the town likes to do on adjacent neighborhoods, but it is an on-site traffic report that will be included. So this is what essentially is going into the PSR on Thursday. And we're very close to being ready to go with that at this point. So that's kind of where we are with the PSR. So with that, I think you were going to, Jay, maybe move to approving the PSR?
Yes, Chris has his hand up and Brian first.
Yeah.
Question. Okay.
Thank you, Jay. I mean, yeah, so we have a procedural matter tonight, just like we did with the PDP, which is to authorize the submittal. And I'm happy to make that motion in a moment. But Charlie, I wonder if you could just take a moment and remind the committee, what is the role of DESE with respect to the special ed spaces and the space program? So when you say the MSBA doesn't take issue with the space template, that is still, as I understand it now, that's still with DESE, and we may hear something back from them when?
No, actually the submission to DESE relative to the space template happens at the schematic design submission.
Okay.
So we have not submitted anything to DESE at this point. And actually we submit it through the MSBA anyway. But, and you know, the MSBA may comment again at the PSR phase on the space template, who knows? But I think it's unlikely they'll say much. And yeah, and schematic will submit it to DESE.
So then is it, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth or their mouths, but do we assume then that the MSBA has at least done some sort of preliminary review of the special ed program and the space summary, or do they sort of ignore that until later and treat that as DESE's turf?
They tend to treat it as DESE's turf. They comment on it. And in this case, we are completely consistent with their guidance. So they don't have any objection, obviously, given that we're consistent with their guidance on that template item.
We have a question from Frank first, Chris.
Just a comment that my experience is that the MSBA is looking for the actual square footage to be in line with a template, but in terms of the actual program, that they give that over to DESE.
Got it. That's very helpful. So unless there are other questions from members, I'm happy to make a motion just on the authorization piece, much as we did for the PDP.
One sec,
My motion
Brian, you
would
had a
be to
question?
authorize
I'll hold my question until a little bit later, Jay. It's,
Okay, all right. All right, go ahead, Chris.
All right, so I move to authorize Project OPM Hill International to submit on behalf of the EFPBC the preferred schematic report or PSR package to the Massachusetts School Building Authority no later than March 3rd, 2022 as required.
Second.
Second by Brian, okay. And roll
And
call,
just so everybody
Don?
knows, that's basically the identical language we use for the PDP. It's just updated for PSR.
Okay, Don's in favor. Geetha?
I'm in favor, Jay, but is there something that we can ask some couple of technical questions, you know?
Would it hold back
when will
the
be
vote, or can we discuss it after we vote?
Well, I did send you an email with 3 questions, right? So it's not something to drag it, but I wanted to post it directly to Charlie, I guess, just because the line that it said, I do feel in my heart when you have finding the information of borings, you have been taught and trained. It's not where the borings are. It's not pretty much nailing down, showing us where the building footprint and where those borings are. Then we will begin to see the story. So to this date, I have not seen a plan that shows the proposed building footprint and where the borings are. So Jay, I have been with this committee for years and years and years, but this is the one when I do feel technically something is not right, I don't give up. So I'm just saying, I'm just saying, so what I'm trying to say is, I think for the very sake, we need to see a plan, the civil-based plan that shows the proposed building footprint and where the borings are. Number 2, CDP went to the MSBA with the Winchester GIS plan. And it's a saying that you don't review a report unless you visit the site. So if I know nothing and I have not stepped into the site, and if I open the Winchester GIS map, I would say, oh, okay, this is just a simple site. You know, just the grades, just drop it. That way it's not a piece of cake. So what I'm trying to say is the Winchester GIS map that went with the PDP, and if we do pull the civil base plan and put next to each other, it will begin to tell the story of the concern that I'm beginning to express. So I'm sure Charlie knows this. When you build a building, we are imposing a load. The loads come from the column. Here we are talking, the Parkinson building is going to have more than 20 feet of fill that is going to fill. So here we are having a building footprint. One portion is going to fill the column load, one portion is going to fill the so many feet of fill plus column loads. So when you place the building footprint in a moisture sensitive soil, it takes years to settle. And I hope this is not a technical session. I tried my best to say it from up front, maybe to put a picture to Jay. I'm sure you were with us for VO. Remember that preloading that we did for the field?
Yeah.
So that's just for the field, okay? So that one, we were not even raising the grade. So I'm saying I've been with this committee for years and years. I didn't have to drag the feet like this. But when I do feel it's not technically right, here I am fighting my heart just for the town, nothing else. So I'm just saying, you don't review a report without stepping into the site. So what went to the MSBA with the Winchester GIS map, I would have no clue of the concern that I'm expressing in this meeting right now. So that's why from day one, I asked, can we please get the civil base plan? Can we please get the civil base plan? So the geotechnical engineer, when they write a report, you give a building footprint because all they say is, we know nothing. We only know at the borings. So somebody to put a statement right there, soil evaluation complete. And to this day, we don't know where the borings are. We don't know where the building footprints are. So I guess I've been, so I am genuinely expressing, it's not dragging the feet, but I do feel, especially with the earthwork, when things get covered up, it's just a perfect storm and we cannot point the finger.
Right. Keith, I don't know if we're at that point yet, though.
What's that?
We're not at that point in
No,
the project.
because, all right, so let me see. For the very sake, if you go to the PDP, MSP, right off the bat, they ask a civil existing condition plan, right? So at least we need to see in a civil-based plan so that we can put it in front of us so that we can begin to talk what we are talking here. So in other words, to this day, we have not seen a plan that would show the building footprint and where the information is gathered. But having that aside, I just wanted to see the grade change and the building footprint that we are talking about. And I'm sure I can directly address Charlie. When you talk about building with the different types of loading, it's like a differential settlement. And I'm sure, how is that taken into consideration? So anyway, so I just wanted to spit it out. What I wanted to say is MSBA didn't have any question. That means we did not provide the correct, information so everybody can see it, what is going on in this site. So anyway, so I just wanted to say today, at this point, I've tried my best to express my concern, just because I know what the implication would be, and I really wanted to say that at least at this point. So,
Jay, can I just chime in? I want Charlie to respond to this, but I'm going to need to sort of respectfully push back on a couple of things. I don't think it's fair to say we did not provide the right information. We have an OPM on board to be sure we're providing the MSBA everything they're asking for. And I take your points about soil characteristics and surcharge loading 100%. You're absolutely right about soil characteristics and the effect of a building on them. But the things you're describing in my mind, we address in schematic design. And we're not in schematic design yet. And I feel like, in a previous meeting, you asked to see the floor plan and its relationship to the chain link fence. And Charlie provided that. And I may have missed it. If you had requested a footprint of the building with respect to the borings, I may have missed that. And maybe we need to provide that to you. But I have to believe that we do know where the borings were because we did them. And certainly TAPE knows where the footprint is. And maybe it's just a matter of sort of building that composite. I think the points you're making are very well taken. I just think they come later. But I'm not driving the bus, and I'd like to maybe hear Charlie or Vivian respond, and then we should vote on the motion.
We have done a lot of public school buildings with the MSBA. We have followed a similar process on all projects. The MSBA asks us at the earliest phase to do preliminary soils investigation. We did that. 2 days of borings. That then becomes part of the submission. We do not have a preferred option and building location at the time those borings are taken. This is absolutely consistent with every project we do. What we have is general assumptions about areas of the site that are worth investigating. What the geotechnical engineers try to do is cover various spots with the hope of covering various conditions. In this case, too, the geotech engineer worked extensively with the town DPW and the school because of concerns around where these borings could be placed, including changing the boring placement plan multiple times. What we now have is general characteristics across the entire site. We do not have a geotechnical study relative to the precise location of the preferred option, because the preferred option wasn't known at the time the geotech did their field work. There is always in every single school project a second and sometimes third protocol around geotechnical investigation once the building once the preferred option is selected and the site plan is developed. That often happens in design development, not even in schematic design, because owners often don't want to spend additional monies until the project has been approved, which seems sensible. The soils information that the geotechnical engineers have so far does not indicate to them that there are any significant concerns about soils on that site. That's what they've said. We have done a lot of projects with Weston and Sampson. We have never had an issue with their preliminary investigation relative to the final outcome. We've done some projects with extremely poor soils that have taken deep foundation systems, piles, mats, PIFs, the whole 9 yards. There is nothing that they've found so far that indicates we're going to have soils problems here. However, when we have a specific footprint, when we have a structural design in place, we will do at some juncture another round of geotechnical investigation. But that's just how it works. That's how this process works. The MSBA wants that information at the beginning. They get it at the beginning.
Yes, and then in the schematic design, we'll do more boring and get more cost estimate so that
we may do them in schematic design. We may do them in design development.
Okay. Keith, are you okay with that?
May I ask a respectful question, Jay? Can we just see, I understand the feasibility study and the schematic design and whatnot. So can I just ask one plan? You can hear me from day one. I was saying, can we ask one plan right in front of us right now, where the borings were and where's the proposed building footprint? I assume there were 7 borings done. And I continue to ask from day one in a civil base plan. Is the civil base plan going for the PSR?
No, there's
It's
no
not.
civil drawing
Okay.
technically for the PSR. There are no architectural plans going with the
No.
PSR. We don't
When I
submit.
say civil
We don't
base plan,
submit. Or we don't submit any kind of technical drawings with the PSR. There's a civil narrative, and but there's no civil drawings.
isn't it a
But yes, the answer is we can provide at the next meeting the boring locations and the proposed building.
May I ask you a question, Charlie? Isn't that an MSBA ask a requirement, existing condition plan to be provided, correct? So that's the one I'm talking about. When you say existing condition
So
plan.
there is a survey.
Yes. So
Yeah.
is there an existing condition plan? That's when I'm using the word base plan.
There is now a survey, yes.
You do have one with the scale and the north arrow and whatnot. That's what
Yeah.
I'm talking about,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And that one, does it show the proposed building footprint that you're submitting with the PSR?
It does not.
It does not.
No.
Okay. The plan that you're submitting, the survey plan, does it show the borings on top of that?
It does not.
It does not. So that's why the puzzle right there sits as unknown. It's not matter of we found good soils at the boring. It's the question of, is it a good soil within the building footprint? That's the multi-million-dollar question. So
And the borings were not placed where the building is. Well, they may have been right on the front of it, but
yes. So that's the
but
multi-million-dollar
the rest of the
question.
site is the water department land, and we did not do borings on the water department land because the water department land was not part of the preliminary analysis. So that would be where you'd have a second round. But I did have multiple conversations with the geotechnical engineer about the water department land, and they said based on what they could see out there, there was no indication that there was some dramatic difference in soils between where they did the borings and the water department land.
So what I wanted to conclude, Jay, is so I guess that's the multi-million-dollar question. It's the saying is one thing, but it's an obvious factor. The moisture-sensitive soils are in the Waterfield department, so in the plot. So when you do place,
We're not building in the floodplain.
no. I guess, Charlie, I think the best thing is the survey plan with the proposed building footprint and the boring shown. Then the conversation can happen, which is something that I've been asking for day one. So when I say that, what I'm trying to say is that it was obvious when you getting closer to the, the footprint of the land that's crossing beyond the chain link. Would you agree that we are getting into moisture sensitive soil? Do you agree with that?
No, because the topography doesn't drop off till you get over to the soccer field.
This whole
With the
conversation,
I don't think this has to do with the submission, Geetha. I think we can address this. Charlie, you have more information next week to address her concerns, you think?
Yeah, I can have the, I'm not sure it's going to address her concerns. I think she's just going to say, well, where are the borings underneath the building footprint? But at the time, we didn't have a building footprint.
Right.
So what we have is a general characteristic survey of the site, a geotechnical survey of the site, absolutely consistent with the process on every school project.
Next week, we'll put on the agenda, Geetha, to address this and see what information we can get out. But I don't think that has anything to do with the submission because it's not shown on the submission from what we reviewed. So,
Jay, in advance of that conversation, have we seen the geotechnical report? Because it might be helpful for us all to look at it so we could have an intelligent conversation, talk about the difference between the characterization of the site and the thinking there's not any reason to believe there's a problem, and then we can, maybe get that.
It's included in the PDP submission.
which is on the
Should be
website.
all there on the should be on the project drive, Brian.
Yeah.
Okay.
Geetha, are you in favor or you want to?
In favor,
mute.
but I tried my best. That's all. Okay.
Understood. Is that a yes? Okay.
Yes. Sorry.
All right. Todd,
Aye.
Lisa,
Yes.
John,
Aye.
Colleen,
Aye.
Don? I can't see you, Don. Okay. Frank?
Aye.
All right. So moved. Moving along. All right. Authorizations, we're good on that. So preferred option design update from TAPE.
Okay, I'm going to share the screen again.
All right.
If I can. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the preferred option design update. So this is just to give a quick update on where we are with the design that's getting submitted to the PSR and also will be presented to the MSBA at the upcoming FAS subcommittee meeting, which is going to happen sometime in the month of March. This is the site plan that we've already discussed. This is going to go into the submission. These are the floor plans more fully developed than they were previously. This is the first floor. No real significant changes to the layout. There now is a supplemental, more monumental open stair in the lobby that will only go to the second floor that was talked about at the last meeting. That kind of invites, it invites students up to the second floor, but also could possibly invite community use up there. The second floor, again, very similar, second grade, third grade are together. We did start to think about, we had that conversation that Frank and then was concerned about students from second and third grade moving through the first grade kind of quadrant. And we thought about ways maybe of subdividing that off a little bit. And maybe one possibility would be having if we had cubbies in the upper grades in the classrooms, so that we can not have cubbies out in those extended learning zones which the teachers are excited about, having that area where for sort of different kind of learning to happen. But maybe at the first grade, we have the cubbies out in the corridor and create kind of a little bit of a sheltered environment. So when you walk down the hall, you aren't actually right next to the classrooms, and sort of pull those out. So we're not sure exactly what the strategy should be, but that's an idea. And it kind of is a placeholder. We did move with some conversations with the district. We have moved the art classroom from the 3rd floor to the 2nd floor, which does 2 things. It puts it in the middle of the building vertically, which means that the younger learners can get to it more easily. But it also is right at the top of this new open supplemental stair we put in the lobby. So that also invites the community to use it potentially, as well as the media center. So our sort of demarcation between academic and community now is beyond the library. And these effectively can become community spaces for use weekends, evenings, and the like. But also if parents have reason to go up and because there's an event, there's an art show, something like that. So that's the 2nd floor now. The 3rd floor, again, art is no longer on the 3rd floor, but there is a big STEM classroom up there for the oldest students, which makes sense. And we continue to have our own stairs there. And then 5th grade is fabulous. They could have an outdoor classroom potentially. We talked about that, the possibility of maybe a green roof. We have to see how much that's going to cost. But I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities here. And this, again, continues to be a diagram, but it's a more developed diagram. We've placed some placeholder furniture in there. And when we get through the PSR and get into the schematic design, one of the first big tasks is going to be to work with Frank and his team in the district and the educators to really start to dig into what we want to do around programming for classrooms and those kind of things. One of the things we're going to be submitting, and I'm not going to spend any time on these. One of the things we submit, though, just part of the PSR, is diagrams that get kind of embedded into the district's educational program that describe some of the concepts. And so these are kind of just showing you those diagrams, and, it shows the extended learning zones. It shows where teacher planning is in the middle of we're putting teacher planning in the middle of the classroom wing, so they have a view in both directions. Teachers all can get there. They can become copy centers as well as planning areas for staff. How we've distributed special education. The fact that, as I just discussed, we have a media center really in the center of the building, vertically, right at the top of these stairs. We have STEM at the 3rd floor where the oldest learners are. We have a diagram that talks about preschool and how that's organized with a control point at the entrance, and with the kind of pre-K administration right at the front door. The opportunity to get to multiple outdoor locations for these youngest students at grade. Also talked about art at the top of the stairs. So these are just diagrams that explain kind of the rationale behind the plan, and they go into the ed plan as sort of supporting. It's the MSBA's way of checking to make sure that the designer is on the same page as the district relative to what the district's kind of vision is. So it's a good exercise. This shows where PE is with connections to the outside. It shows sort of a layout of the site showing pick up and drop off of buses, pick up and drop off of automobiles, outdoor learning areas. One of the questions the MSBA asked in their PDP review is, can you give us a diagram of sort of patterns of pedestrian movement on the site and accessibility? And so this shows accessible entrances, which are effectively all the entrances, as well as accessible ways around the site. And this shows that, that central play area. And I know there's been some conversations around, how big that should be relative to cars and parking and the like. And we can dig into that deeper during the schematic design process. But this area in front of the building right now is as wide as a football field. and it's about 3/4 of the length of the football field. So it isn't a small area that we've kind of carved out here for the kiddos. And then another diagram they asked for was a site section, and we had done a site section previously, but this one now shows the building on the site. And then we've been working on, more developed sort of diagrams of the building massing. And this is a view from the south showing the axis across the brook, parking on the east side, pick up and drop off on the east side, entrance to pre-K, then that large area in the middle for outdoor learning and for play, which will have to be programmed, developed, and designed. And then on the western side, the bus loop and another car loop that can enter and exit from the west. And then that limited connection we talked about, which, we'll have to get fully sort of vetted. But the idea that you can connect the two sites for public safety, and then the fields in the background. So that's that massing. And then from the rear, you can see the soccer fields, the building, the gym in the back. And then that same sort of configuration in the front. So that gives you a little bit of the massing. We have a long way to go. This is really still diagrammatic, entirely diagrammatic, but it begins to give you a sense of how a 3-story building might develop. And there are sort of lower scale elements in the front, including the possibility of that green roof. So that gets us to the end of the sort of design update for now, and there are hands raised, Jay.
All right, Chris.
Yeah, so I want to bring up something we mentioned a couple of meetings ago, only because I feel like if there's any chance of getting it in the project, best to show it in the PSR, let the MSBA tell us it's out of scope. Charlie, can you go back a couple of slides? I want to find that AXO. Go back one more, please. One more.
That's
no, I'm sorry. Go forward. Give me the second AXO. There you go. Okay. So right now, pedestrians that are accessing the Lynch site from the neighborhood side, they're on the left, are sharing that point of access with that bridge over the brook. It is a very, I call it, pedestrian unfriendly bridge. I think that curb is actually more than 6 inches. It's more like an 8-inch vertical granite curb. Yes, there's a sidewalk there, but there's a tremendous amount of vehicular traffic. And one of the things we kicked around was this idea potentially of a footbridge just for pedestrians that you might even show, Charlie, I don't know if you can show with your cursor, but there where the road in the neighborhood, the road makes that 90-degree jog. You see those 3 houses there sort of towards the bottom of the screen. Yeah. So the analogy is to the VO school, where the kids at the end of the day, particularly the older kids, they actually leave school at the end of the day and they walk through the science park. They walk through the woods and they get picked up on Amberwood Drive, or they just walk home through the neighborhood. And that's really a wonderful opportunity for those kids because they're not having to just literally share space with cars or buses or what have you. So I wonder if there's an opportunity now. When you go back to your plan, you had those, I think, the blue dotted lines that showed pedestrian circulation. Is there not an opportunity to suggest a footbridge? Yeah, that one. Is there not an opportunity to show that circulation that you have on the field side of the building literally just sort of continue right through the trees over the brook? And we can at least begin to separate the pedestrian and vehicular traffic. You know, if the committee feels like that's a waste of money and not even worth exploring with the MSBA, I'm not going to die on the hill for it, but I think it's something worth at least exploring.
Well, I think it would be a big cost. A, and B is right in our 100-foot wetland buffer and our 200-foot Rivers Act setbacks. So I think that there are some environmental concerns about it as well, which might be under consideration. We certainly could show it as a possibility. One of the things we talked about to the landscape architect, the bridge right now, the sidewalk is on the southern side. And we talked about maybe trying to reconfigure the bridge, not change it too much, but reconfigure it so the sidewalk was on the northerly side. Because if we did that, then kids could come in and get right onto the site without ever having to cross traffic, which might be useful if it's, so that might be a sort of less significant intervention, but one that could help with pedestrian safety. So I think either of those is possible. I'm not sure what it would cost to do a pedestrian bridge, but I don't think it's going to be inexpensive.
Is it possible?
Well, the issue there was that Todd that was asking.
Yeah, Todd.
I was wondering if we could widen the bridge.
So Todd, that'd be a great question for Beth Rudolph, but that bridge was substantially, it was basically rebuilt. That bridge was rebuilt, I mean, I want to say only like 4 years ago. So we could certainly go back and see what the cost was to do that work. The analogy, and I should have made this earlier, there is a simple wooden footbridge that probably some members are familiar with at Ginn Field. That was reconstructed a few years ago that you can get to the Ginn Field playground from Mystic Valley Parkway. And of course, you're going right over the Aberjona. So I would assume the same sort of regulatory restrictions and conservation concerns would apply. But if we did it there, I just wonder if it's worth thinking about here. I mean, it's literally, I think it's built out of pressure treated.
Yes.
I think it's a good idea.
Would we
Look
have to
into
worry
it.
about
Yeah, for
ADA
safety
and all that?
reasons.
Yeah, I worked on that bridge rehabilitation. It would be that's a very tricky site. That bridge is not accessible now, nor is that sidewalk that's on Horn Pond Brook, just given the elevations. So you would have to completely rebuild the bridge, which I think would be very expensive. And then I agree with Charlie. I think a pedestrian, I mean, it's not to say it can't be done. Anything can be done. I do think a pedestrian bridge would be expensive as well. And it's a pretty lengthy permitting process to get a Chapter 91 license. But yeah, I mean, anything's possible. It just takes time and money.
And
Yeah, so like I said, I'm not.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I wonder because I walk that every day with my kids. It's pretty, I agree with you. It's a pinch point. It's a very narrow bridge for two-way traffic. And then you have the sidewalk, which doesn't always feel so safe. And I just wonder if there's some landscape element, even if, the sidewalk has to stay on the other side, there's, could there be any sort of boundary instituted between the edge of the sidewalk and the vehicular route to kind of just, even if it's just, I don't know, even if it's not safety, but just being able to set those two things aside. But I agree with you, Chris. I mean, if there was an easy way to take, because that is such a pinch point. And Mr. Rich, who's the crossing guard there, it is nuts in the morning he's got like a 5-way street crossing that he manages. So it's, being able to take some of the pedestrian circulation out of that intersection would be great. So I do support studying the other as well.
And my only other observation, Colleen, would just be, the bridge that we just built there, well, we basically rebuilt it about 5 or 6 years ago now. Yeah. Crossing the same brook, right? So the same sort of regulatory restrictions would apply if we did a pedestrian bridge. The only difference being presumably it would be less money than what we built for vehicles because it's only for pedestrians. But I get it. It wouldn't be cheap, but I wanted to raise it tonight because I feel like if we don't talk about it and if we feel like it's important, we should probably be expressing it somehow in the PSR. And then maybe we study it. Because at the end of the day, and Charlie's diagram here does a great job, it's a funnel. We're funneling all that vehicular and pedestrian traffic back to one point, which is really not ideal. So if we're interested in doing it, maybe this is when we show it. But if we're not interested, we let it go.
Mark has a question also. Mark.
Yeah, I think if I understand it correctly, Chris, the reason you're asking us to think about it now is that we want to capture a cost event so that the MSBA is aware of it.
Yes, and particularly because, and because Charlie's diagram that he's created here kind of speaks to a question from the MSBA, excuse me, which is going to show us how circulation works. And so, there's an opportunity here to really sort of substantially separate the pedestrians from the vehicles on that side of the site.
Yeah, and if it sounds like there's an opportunity to do some improvements. It may be tough on the bridge based on what I'm hearing about accessibility and stuff. It's a possibility that there could be an additional structure, whether it's right next to the existing bridge or further along, that could carry some permitting time as well as cost associated with it. But is there a penalty that the project would pay for showing at least an idea conceptually to separate vehicular and pedestrian traffic as part of the PSR site plan?
There's no penalty. There's just no time to really develop it. I will say, so as probably everyone on the call knows, the MSBA caps site work costs, reimbursement for site work. So anything that's above and beyond their percentage contribution is 100% direct anyway to the town. So the fact of the matter is they're not going to object to added site scope, I don't think, later, given that they already aren't going to contribute 100% to site work because they don't on any school. So I'm not sure we need to necessarily capture too much, but we could try to show some kind of placeholder note in these site plans just to indicate the possibility of considering it, just so we're on record.
Geetha, you have a
That's a
question?
good
But
idea.
I'm not concerned. I know I'm certainly not. The MSBA would not come back and say, "Oh, you didn't tell us about that at the PSR. We're not going to let you do it." I don't think that would ever happen.
Geetha?
Yeah, I agree with Charlie. That's the thought I had, and I do support the pedestrian bridge over there, knowing that it's very recent. Maybe we can cantilever it. But I wanted to ask you guys a thought. I thought one time there was a thought about some maybe enhancing the access to the field. Could that meet halfway to school and the field, or maybe that had gone away? Providing a decent access to the field from the, Horn Pond Brook site.
Well, I think we're proposing that there's a proposed path that goes down to the fields on both the eastern side and the western side. So I think we are improving access from both sides of the site. There's going to be associated parking on the east side. If people park and want to get to the field, there'll be associated parking on the west side if people want to get to the site.
My question was, accessing to the field, not perhaps through the school, from that road, Horn Pond Brook. Is there a road that they can just go further up? No?
Well, I guess it would be the idea of this pedestrian bridge and path, but I don't know to what degree if these fields are being used for whatever, Saturday morning youth soccer, there may be families coming from all over town, right? So
Yeah.
I would assume a lot of them are driving. So yeah, we could ask the landscape architect to just drop a couple of notes in.
Okay. Keith, you all set with that? Your hand's up. Okay. Any other questions for Charlie? Frank?
I'm just trying to think through, and this isn't really a question probably be answered tonight, and it doesn't really matter for this submission necessarily, but I'm trying to make that outdoor classroom in between the parking lots and the bus loop and the parent loop and with the playground right there work in my head instructionally. So I'm just pointing it out, I guess, and I understand looking at the site. I don't know where else it would go, but So I guess I just need to think a little bit about it a little bit more. I mean, ideally it would be out back with like the other two are, but I also understand just accessing it is problematic. So.
Well, I mean, we truly have not gotten into rolling up our sleeves and programming these kind of spaces.
Right,
So, I
right.
mean, when we identify how many you want and what type of spaces you want, we'll be able to do a lot better job of beginning to understand what we need to provide. I mean, it may be that the ones in the back are adequate, that programmatically we don't, or you might say we need one, you might say we need 5. You might say we need big enough for 2 grades or 2 classrooms, or you may say, no, we only, so et cetera, et cetera. I think to some degree, we'll have to get into that. But I think we can certainly create a really nice, safe zone at the front of the south side of the building with planting and that's secure and is separate from traffic. And certainly anything on the north side is going to be quite quiet. And
Right.
then on the east side where the pre-K is, there's actually a cantilever that comes out on the second floor because of the classroom wing on the second floor pushes out. And that allows even for a covered spot, which is one of the things that some of the teachers were kind of jazzed about, the idea that you might have a covered place. So I think there are opportunities. As I said, this is a big area. As I say, it's as wide as a football field, and it's 3/4 of the length of a football field. So, if you imagine a football field in your head, this is a pretty big space we have to work with. And I'm hoping that we acknowledge we need active play structures and the like, and that we need outdoor classroom space. But there's a fair amount of room to try to figure that out.
Right. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, we'll move on. Authorizations. Meg, do you have anything?
I think we were going to
No, today we're going to talk about.
Oh, yeah, phasing logistics. Sorry, skip
No
right
worries.
over.
Yeah, so just so you know, I do not have any authorization.
Okay, I jumped ahead. So
phase.
Sally, you're also taking that.
Yeah. Okay. So phasing and logistics. We just, we left the last meeting talking about this topic, and we wanted to return to it and just add a little bit more clarity. There's still a ton of moving parts. So there are probably as many questions as there are answers, but I think it's a conversation that this committee needs to keep having. And we did end the last meeting talking about the carriage house as one possible solution to this kind of ongoing issue around how do we potentially get students off-site if we need to. Does Frank have his hand raised?
Sorry, just taking it down yet.
All right.
See? Oh, no. Okay.
You good, John?
So, but there was a question at the raise of the last meeting about the playground at the existing Lynch, and we just wanted to answer the question. Somebody said, well, how much of the playground are you taking over? This orange line is effectively what we proposed in the last meeting, the diagrams we showed for construction enclosure. So as you can see, it really bisects the playground. So I think, there's no question that a significant percentage of the playground area is going to be impacted by this. So we just wanted to be able to answer that question. So one of the questions is, if we did go with this kind of a plan, could the school get by with a fairly limited play area, or do we need to consider other locations for temporary play? So that's not really a conversation for tonight. It's something to be developed in the future, but we're just answering a question that came up at the last meeting.
Okay.
The next topic was we started to talk about the Parkhurst. This is the Parkhurst site. This is one candidate for swing space if the decision is we need swing space. And it is either to put students in the Parkhurst itself if district administration is not in the Parkhurst, or conversely, it's to add some modulars at this site. This site, as everybody knows, steep hill coming up to it. There's some existing parking that's relatively limited. It's adequate for right now, I guess adequate for, Frank would know better, generally adequate for pre-K, 3 pre-K classrooms and district administration. That's not a parking heavy load. There is enough room here to swing a bus around. There is a couple of existing modular classrooms, as you all know. There is a play area. There's then a fairly significant hill before you get up to an upper play area. So the obvious candidate for placing any modulars would be on the flat area. And just so we're all clear, it has certain implications. One being it's going to impact on the play area. And if we added 2 grades, which is 8 classrooms, is going to definitely impact on vehicular access. So theoretically, if you wanted to maintain a loop here, you're probably moving the island, reducing the number of parking spaces in order to get swing around cars. If we could do 1 grade of modulars, then we're only displacing parking. And then, of course, there are some other issues. There's oil tank, I believe, it's some sort of fuel tank out there. There's utility pole there. So there's other work. But this would be the most obvious way you could connect to the existing building, given that there's a corridor where the modulars are. So the conversation that we had at the last meeting was, well, gee, if you could move district administration to the carriage house, then you would free up potentially 2 grades worth of classrooms within the Parkhurst, which would help with phasing issues at the Lynch during construction. If you were unable to relocate district administration because there was nowhere else for them to go, then you get into this conversation, well, how do we accommodate a couple of grades worth of classrooms? And that this is why we did this diagram. And then the red dashed line is, well, what if you even had to have 3 grades offsite? And that really occupies the vast majority of the parking lot and the pickup and drive. So this is just to give some information and some context on not only the conversation we had last week about the fact that modulars are, if they're temporary, are a throwaway cost. They're a one-time cost to the town because you get them and then you have to return them and you don't really have any it's not a capital investment. While if you could use the Parkhurst itself and update the carriage house, then at least the town's contribution is towards a permanent facility for the community. So those are sort of the questions out there. And this is not intended as a solution. It's just intended as sort of informational evidence. I think Chris has his hand raised.
Yes, Chris.
Charlie, I really appreciate this diagram. This diagram is really kind of showing 2 different conditions, right? It's sort of saying, well, if we could get Frank and team out of the building, then you can use those classrooms and you don't need modulars. But if central office stays, then we're going to have to add something to the site. You're doing a good job showing what the impact is with respect to, with the circle, you're simply pointing out the playground is impacted. It has to be relocated. The design problem is, where would it go? So you're not that you're solving any design problems, but you're certainly pointing them out. And it seems to me that if we went with 8 modulars, which would be 2 grade levels, we certainly would lose some parking. And that kind of compound curve at the end of the parking lot was actually purposely designed by TAP A back in 2011 to accommodate the yellow buses that would come in to drop off kids. So we might be able to, and Lisa in particular wanted you to focus on this, if we cut that lot in half, which we'd have to do just to accommodate 2 grades, we presumably could find a way to get buses in and out and probably still set aside 2 or 3 accessible parking spaces for individual vehicles. Probably not a whole lot more than that, but if you had, and then we're supplementing parking where? And it seems to me it'd have to be up on the upper field.
Right.
And if we went with 3 grade levels, and I wonder if that's not something we have to do with AR2, even though that's not our preferred option, then that basically wipes this out completely. All we're really able to do is almost have like a little a recess off the road for buses to come in, drop kids, and then pull out, somehow figure out how they turn around. Now we're really talking about losing the Parkhurst field for 2 years because we're going to have to turn that into a parking lot. Am I right?
I think you're right.
And so do you have, I think you and Hill have begun to get some information on costs associated with modulars, and we've talked a little bit about this in the abstract. And going back to like September, Vivian and Andy came to the school committee and we basically said the value of the space at Parkhurst is between $2 and $3 million because we feel, and that was just back in the fall without any kind of detailed assessment. If we had to replace that with modulars, what can you share based on what we know today in terms of installation and rental and removal and so forth?
Well, I think we've come up with a general kind of working number of $2.5 million.
For 8?
I don't know if Andy has any other view on that, but I think that was kind of the budget, and that's for 8 classrooms. Yep, and that assumes you're prepping the site, you're transporting the units to the site, you're leasing the units for a given amount of time, and then you're paying a significant amount of money to then remove them again at the end.
But that $2.5 million presumably does not include the redesign and reconstruction of the parking lot or the subsequent redesign and restoration of the parking lot back to something like it looks like today, right?
No, I mean, they had some money, they had some kind of an allowance in for some utility work and site prep, but it was generic. I mean, no, we didn't give the modular vendors, detailed drawings. They just just sort of said, here's some assumptions. So yes, I think the answer is that doesn't include full reconfiguration of the site.
And then it
certainly doesn't include anything to do with the playground, which is a legitimate consideration too.
And if we had to go to to 3 grade levels, that would be approximately another $1 million.
Yeah, probably that makes sense. Yep.
Okay.
Mark, you had a question? Mark?
Yeah, and none of those costs that we're talking about do anything to improve the existing conditions at the Parkhurst school.
Correct. That assumes that it's business as usual with the Parkhurst. That the whole premise of this is if admin can't leave, then admin stays where they are and continues to operate as they do now. I think the other challenge that we're not even talking about is that if you go there on any given day, a lot of that parking lot is full. So if we're now saying, okay, we're going to introduce 2+ grades of kids, we're going to have 2+ grades worth of teachers and staff as well that currently don't park there. And if we're encroaching on the parking in the driveway, then that becomes even more challenging. That's kind of the idea is, yes, we're not doing anything to the Parkhurst whatsoever.
What about the storage that was once at Parkhurst about a year ago that wasn't being used, that was planning to be used for other things? There was a whole area, I believe, on the ground floor.
Lisa, that's where that lower level was off limits to us because of the MAAB ruling, a few years ago until we put in the elevator. So Frank and his team actually moved our preschool program into the lower level over the summer because we were out of room. We were out of room for them at Lynch. So to that,
I was wondering if we could use that too as well. That's why I was asking. I know since we've got the elevator in there, but
it's a great question because just going back to Mark's question and Charlie's answer, business as usual. So what we basically we have 4 sections downstairs at the lower level, and then we would have central office if they stayed at Parkhurst, the upper level is just occupied. And then we'd be putting, in addition to that, 8 modulars on site. So to put it in context, when we moved the VO students into Parkhurst back in 2011, that was 13 classrooms full of kids. But that was it. 13 classrooms, K-5. What we're talking about here is basically 4 downstairs plus 8, that's 12. But in addition to that, a full central office. So Charlie is quite right. I mean, just the expanded volume of sort of traffic and the coming and going and so forth on such a constrained site is sort of hard for me to imagine.
Yeah.
Brian?
Yeah.
Yeah, Brian, then Mark.
So if we move admin over to the carriage house and we are able to reclaim that space in the main building, we don't need any modulars in that case. Is that right?
Yeah, that was kind of the premise, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 classrooms shown here, which is essentially 2 grades plus a multi-purpose space and some admin area.
Charlie.
Plus the modular.
Yeah.
How many modulars would we need once we move the admin over to, say, the carriage house? Well, are we looking at 2 or 4?
Our thought was possibly none.
Oh, that would be good, because then it makes sense.
Right. That was kind of the other strategy. The alternative strategy would be, yes, we can fit enough students within the existing Parkhurst and the existing modulars to take pressure off the Lynch site during construction, to allow for adequate parking by taking down a piece of the existing Lynch at the beginning, and not do any modulars over here, which means we can leave the playground alone. We can leave the utilities alone. We can leave the parking alone. So the only capital cost to that idea is whatever upgrades we need to do to the inside of the Parkhurst to make it ready for students. So you can move furniture over, but there is going to be some upgrades, because, if you go walk around in there now, there are temporary, there are partitions up in some of the classrooms, et cetera, et cetera. So there would be some work. And we're going to go in and have a walk around and try to come up with a kind of sense of scope. But it is nothing like the cost of modulars to go in and make some limited upgrades to allow students to use the space.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just add too, Charlie, I feel like the scope is nothing like what it was back in 2010 when we put $1.1 million into the building, which had really sat vacant since Ambrose had been built. Some may recall that during Ambrose construction, believe it or not, some ceilings actually collapsed in the lower level spaces of the building. So the building commissioner came over with the fire chief and said, "This building is closed. Congratulations, kids. You get to start your summer early." So there was just a lot of work we had to do on Parkhurst at the time. And in this case, we have, much less is needed.
Mark, you have a question?
Yeah, so it feels, I know we had part of this conversation last time, but we've got the carriage house by Ambrose that something has to be done with it, but it's an asset that the town owns. We've got the Parkhurst School, which currently occupies at some level of inefficiency the central office, but with a modest investment could be turned back into a functioning classroom building. And then we've got Lynch, anything that we can do to move some of the students, a minimum number of students off-site, is going to free up some options for how the construction gets phased and completed. It feels to me like if there's a way to invest in capital projects that improve the character and usability of the buildings that the town owns, that's always going to be a better proposition than spending money on a temporary condition that's basically throwaway money. I mean, it might be necessary, but it's not money that the town gets long-term return on. So given that, I feel like having the option, even if it's not executed, having the option to move central admin to the carriage house, to use Parkhurst the way it was originally designed as a classroom building, as swing space for Lynch while Lynch is under construction, seems like a very valuable thing for us to have. And if I understand what happened, if I understand the conversation last time, the way that the scheduling works out, if we want that option to happen, we need to have a warrant, or a warrant needs to be placed on the Springtown meeting for this year to complete the design documents so that that work can be completed for these projects, to give us that opportunity. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mark. In fact, I have a timeline that's pretty conceptual, but it speaks to that issue. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So if our end game is to have a construction start, so the Lynch is down here, the bottom list, the green thing here. If we have an end game, which is a construction start of January of 2004, in order to get students into the building in August of 2025, which is a very tight 20-month construction schedule, we need to be able to kind of engage in preparing the site in the fall. And that means, and we've talked to Frank, feels strongly that if we're going to do that, we need to have moved whatever students offsite that we're going to move offsite into swing space by the summer of 2023. So in order to accomplish that, you need an empty Parkhurst by the summer of 2023, so that in September 1st or whatever it is, beginning of school, the students who are going to be in swing space are in swing space. They're not at the Lynch. And those Lynch classrooms that they have emptied will become available. And our initial proposal was to demolish in order to make space on site for parking. In order to have that to happen, if the carriage house was the solution, we would need to do, and then carriage house is up here in yellow. We'd need to do the documents for the carriage house in the summer. The project would need to be bid in the fall so that construction could occur in late into 22 into the middle of 2023. We've sort of assumed 6 months. This I think shows 7, but no, it shows 6 actually. 6 months of construction, which seems equally aggressive. And that would allow the district to move into the carriage house in the summer, which means they are, in June, which means they're emptying the Parkhurst so the Parkhurst can be prepared for students. So we just had that conversation about the fact that something has to happen at the Parkhurst. We don't know precisely what, but let's just assume it's a couple of months to get it ready. And also you got to move furniture in. The teachers have to be able to move their equipment and gear over. I mean, it's probably more than a 2 month, but I think you presume you do it over the summer. It's hard to understand how we could possibly get to a available Parkhurst school available for students to walk in on September 1st if the architect wasn't beginning the documentation of the bid documents by early summer of this year. So that's the rationale for that possibility. That means, again, that we are spending the summer of 23 fixing up the Parkhurst, moving stuff from the Lynch to the Parkhurst, preparing for students who arrive in the fall. And then the Lynch project would be starting documentation in hopefully the very beginning of 2023. And doing site permitting, which is going to be a big lift on this project due to the sensitivity around it, based probably on design development drawings that might happen in the summer, early summer. And that allows the project to have theoretically some kind of either early, if it's either an early package bid as a separate bid of its design bid build, or as some sort of mini GMP if it's CM at risk. But suffice it to say, there needs to be an enabling package that would go out in parallel to the main bid package. And then that construction, that enabling construction is happening in the fall of 23. And the full package is bidding at the end of 23 in anticipation, as I said, of that start, let's say January 1 of 2024. So this is really high. This is 1,000-foot up kind of a schedule, but it kind of gives you a sense of the conundrum here, the problem here. There's simply no way to not start on the carriage house.
Charlie, can I ask a question? Then can I ask sort of an inverse question from what Mark did? So, if to Mark's point, if to at least have the option is valuable, if we were to go to Springtown meeting and request this, if it fails, better to fail in the spring than in the fall. But if in fact we were, so then what's the consequence of no? If the consequence of no, I gather, is your previous slide, which is it's 8 modulars at Parkhurst, and it's between $2.5 and $3 million. It's throwaway money. But can you? I want to be sure we understood this, because I think we talked about this at a certain high level at the last meeting. The MSBA, although they do not reimburse for swing space, it's allowed to be wrapped into the project funding agreement. But
Correct.
The project funding agreement isn't going to town meeting until the fall. And even once it's approved, it then has to go to a debt exclusion override in January. And
Correct.
only then do we cut you loose to even begin doing your design work. So the question I'm building up to is, if not the carriage house and then moving central office and funding it in the spring so that we can be ready for kids, if we have to go with modulars that are wrapped into a PFA in the fall and a debt exclusion in January, I thought I heard at the last meeting that the design and management team is no longer confident that we would actually be able to have those kids off site by the fall of 23, correct?
I don't know if I said that, but I don't know. I mean, the question is, can you design and procure and deliver and make live modulars between January and August? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 plus months. That seems aggressive intuitively to me, but I don't know for sure if you could do it or not. I mean, you need to obviously prepare a bid package, right? Which is its own type of modular procurement package. And then the modular companies have to fabricate or procure and deliver the units, and then they have to install them. So the question, and maybe Andy knows the answer. So the question is, can they do that in 6 months?
Well, but just to add to that list, Charlie, it's not just the construction, but as you said earlier, the teachers have to move in.
As well. Correct.
Yeah, but the teachers have to move in.
Well, right. So you need a month. You typically need sort of a month for shakeout and move in and the like. Yep.
So basically, if you guys started designing, let's say February 1, not that we have a date yet for the debt exclusion override, but if you start designing, or if you start on your documents on February 1, what confidence do we have that the work would be complete so teachers can start moving in, let's say August 1st? That's 6 months.
Chris, I think we'd have to treat it as an early package somehow, so that if there were a warrant for the spring for the carriage house in Parkhurst, and that warrant were to fail, that article were to fail, then I think in order to be prepared to have modulars on site when they're needed, we would have to figure out a way to release the work on modulars in advance of that January debt override exclusion.
Yeah, and I think Mark, the way to do it, and I wonder what I mean. We're getting into strategy, although it's a good thing to talk about. I think the way to do it is, because swing space is already unreimbursed. And the way I think of it is, the longer you wait, actually, the more it costs because of escalation. I wonder if we couldn't consider like a fall appropriation just for modulars, totally separate from the Lynch project. And then those just get excluded from the PFA. And then if that passes in the fall, we save ourselves a little bit of time.
So all that being said, I still think we should. What is the process to get a warrant article for Springtown meeting? And is that something that we would make a motion tonight on?
Well, what we would need is some direction tonight. We would need a motion to prepare an article for the spring warrant. And as Don said at the last meeting, the EFPBC's practice has been to put forward articles at town meeting for major capital projects. And then because the warrant closes on Friday the 10th, then we have time to actually develop some language that we would bring back to next week's EFPBC meeting for review and then an actual vote to submit.
I have a quick question, guys. Charlie, does anybody have an idea what it would cost to modify the Parkhurst? The reason why I'm saying this, if we get over, if it's over $250,000, I'm using that because that's the ADA guideline, which means we'd have to do the whole building over under ADA guidelines. So I don't know what that would cost. Because that means the whole facility would have to take a whole new look at it and would have to do another plan on it. And that could be very costly, but do we have any idea what it would cost to, upgrade the Parkhurst for this?
So, Lisa, we have some preliminary numbers. I'd have to go back because we shared some of that with town meeting and the select board in the fall. But I think that was somewhere between $12 and $15 million for a full code upgrade on the building.
Okay.
Although I don't think the trigger is just 250,000. I think there's two triggers. One of them is 33% of the assessed building's value, and another is 30% for two different compliance issues. My understanding is if you spend 30% or more of the assessed value of the building within a 3-year period, you're then required to bring the building entirely up to code. The only exception being if you spend $1 million to put in a sprinkler system, they don't hold that against you because the state likes sprinklers. So because we've already put in nearly $1 million for the elevator and the stage lift,
okay,
that's already sort of working against us, if you will. And if you just throw, let's say we have to put in between $300,000 and $700,000 into Parkhurst to get it ready for kids. We could do that and still be safely below that 30% trigger.
Good.
But we can't. What we cannot afford to do is put like $2.5 million into Parkhurst because then we do go over the trigger. Parkhurst is assessed, and I'm just doing this from like cobwebs in the back of my head. I think the building is assessed at like $8.2 million or something like that. We have all that on record and we've done that math. So we should be able to comfortably put into Parkhurst what we need to get it ready for kids for swing space. And to Mark's other point, although the school committee has no plans for Parkhurst beyond use for swing space, to have that building available as frankly a potential source of revenue to rent out to any number of educational sort of entities who may be interested in the building, it frankly stands as a real strong source of revenue back to the town for an extended period of time as well, which one could see as sort of offsetting the cost of all this work.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just didn't know, make sure we're below that so we can make sure that we don't have to do all those modifications. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so we looked at that in the fall and we thought we only looked at it because, we went to town meeting to ask for money for design development. And so we wanted to be sure that we were.
Okay, good, great.
And Lisa, we are going to walk through the building and at least begin to kind of create a list.
Okay, appreciate it.
All right.
So Jay, I would like to make a motion. I don't want to close off discussion or anything, but I would like to make a motion to get that process going.
Okay. Start the process. Who seconded?
So,
Brian.
yeah, so sorry, I'll try to be more specific. So I propose a motion to prepare an article for the Springtown meeting warrant for the completion of construction documents and obtaining project costs for the renovation of the carriage house for central office relocation, and construction documents and costs for alterations required to the Parkhurst School to serve as swing space for the Lynch School.
Okay.
Second.
All right. We'll get a roll call on this. And Lisa?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Todd?
Aye.
Geetha? John?
Aye.
Colleen?
Aye.
Chris?
Aye.
And Don?
Jay, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Mark, was your motion just to fund the construction documents or the construction itself?
Well, so I think I just want to make sure that there is a warrant article on for Springtown meeting, and for how it gets word. I guess we would have an opportunity we'd need to figure something out by next week to vote on that was the specific language of the article. But the goal, I would think that we would need to have documentation and construction costs for the carriage house, documentation and construction costs for Parkhurst School, and as part of that article.
Okay, and that's fine. Yeah.
My only caveat, Meg, would be, I mean, I agree with what Mark is saying, although to be really kind of technical about it, I think what we really want to say is project costs as opposed to construction costs, so it pick up the soft costs and everything. Yeah.
But if you're trying to, I'm still looking at Charlie's timeline here. You're not going to bid that project in, late September of 22, because the next time you could fund construction would be November of 22. So that's my only point. It seems to me you're just asking for, at Springtown meeting, you're asking for funding for the, construction documents for both the Parkhurst and the carriage house. And then at a later time, I don't know, that you would have to go back for construction funding.
No, I think what Mark is saying, we're in for all of it.
Okay,
And
wanted to clarify that. Didn't sound to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what I would propose, Meg, is Jay and I can work with you to come up with some language that addresses these questions for the next EFPBC meeting. And then, of course, I mean, for those on the EFPBC who don't know, what the deadline is to get an article in, which Mark's not making a motion on the language of the article, just that we want to prepare language for the warrant. And then after that article gets submitted, comes our next deadline would be to actually develop the motion language, which would need to address the funding source, and then of course background language that sort of explains it all. So there's some steps along the way that we reach. We don't have to have it all figured out, for that initial deadline for the 10th.
Okay. So we're all in favor anyways. So we have to get going by the 10th. So we'll bring it up again next Monday.
Yeah.
It'll be on the agenda for next Monday. All right. Are we all set with this? I think so.
I'm done.
Okay. Any other business to discuss? Anything new?
Just a question.
Go ahead, Brian.
Kind of relates to the schedule and also the well field land. do we have like a phase one ESA for the Wellfield site? Do we need that for the potential conveyance of it between two town bodies? And then relative to the decommissioning of the well fields, is there anything about that that would impact the schedule that we should be keeping in mind for the early procurement items and scope of work? Or do we know yet?
Meg, go ahead.
Well, the town manager's office is putting a warrant on the town meeting schedule to convey, transfer the ownership of the land from the select board to the school department. So nothing else is required to make that happen. That should be voted the first night of town meeting, which is late April. It's that last Monday in April. Because it's not a financial article. So on April 25th, that will be voted. And then based on the information that we have from VHB, I don't think anything would impact our schedule. We had talked a few weeks ago about getting the permitting started so that we could officially close the well fields permit wise. And then we could hire for pretty, small money. We can get a driller out there to, fill in the wells that we know about. We had talked about doing some imaging to try to locate the additional wells that haven't been located. Now we might want to spend the money doing that up front and get it done. Or there was talk, earlier also about just including all of that in the general contractor's contract.
It sounds like nothing we think hits the critical path of the project.
I don't believe so, no. Yeah.
Anything else? Okay, next meetings will be March 7th. FAS status and the P&L early package. And then March 14th, we'll just continue on same agenda. And we'll add in the discussion about the Parkhurst and the carriage house to the 7th. Anything
Jay,
else?
I just wanted to add just a note of thanks that to Hill and Tappe and Frank and his team. We didn't acknowledge tonight the MSBA threw everybody a curveball last week. They've actually accelerated the deadline for the facility assessment report. And that typically comes maybe 2 or 3 weeks after the PSR. So that was a little bit of a surprise. So on top of all the juggling that everybody was doing last week, they're also pulling together this presentation. The project website still assumes that we're going to be meeting on the facility, that meeting is going to happen on, I think, March 30th. But they told us that it might actually happen as early as March 16th. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who's been quick to jump on that. So nobody can say that we're withholding information from the MSBA, even though they surprise us sometimes.
Okay, agreed. Get a motion to close then?
So moved.
Okay, second. Right, Mark. Etha?
Aye.
Lisa?
Yes.
Colleen?
Aye.
Don? Todd?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Frank?
Aye.
Mark? And John?
Aye.
All right, so moved. We are done. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Nice
Have a good
night.
night.
Thank you.
Good night.
See you next week.